Welcome back, everyone. In the last lesson, we talked about what cloud functions are and what they can do. In this lesson, we are going to set up all our tools that we are going to need to write and deploy our cloud functions. You can write cloud functions in JavaScript or TypeScript in the Node.js environment. Now, full disclosure, I am not a JavaScript or TypeScript expert by any means, and if you aren't either, that's okay. But hey, if you're coming over from web development, then you have a leg up on this section. So for this course, just about all the code we need is provided to us in the Stripe and Firebase documentation. So if you aren't well versed in JavaScript, don't worry about it too much. So the first thing we are going to need is Node.js and NPM, which is Node Package Manager. Now there's a few ways of downloading Node. You could just go to nodejs.org and you can download it straight from here. You can use Homebrew and type brew install node in a terminal. Let me open up a terminal window here. So if you have Homebrew, you can say brew install node, and that will install the latest version of Node. Looks like it's going to update Homebrew for me first, so we'll continue on while it's doing that. The third way, and what I'm going to recommend, is doing it with NVM. Okay, so this is Node Version Manager. So if you come over here to, if you just search for NVM, it should be the top result here, Node Version Manager. And the reason I recommend this is the other two ways sometimes end up with some permission errors, and so that's kind of a pain. So come over here, and what we're going to do is install it we're going to first install Node Version Manager. And if you just come down here to installation and update, all you got to do is copy this line right here. And then back in our terminal window, let's see if this is done yet. It is not. So I'm going to wait for this to finish, and then I'll be back when it is. Alrighty, so I just ended up opening up a new terminal window. And so we have that line copied right here from its GitHub page. And I'm going to paste that. And that should download and install if you don't already have it installed. Mine says NVM is already installed, so that's fine. But if you haven't already installed it, then you'll be able to install it using that bit of code right there. Next thing that we're going to do is use NVM to install Node, okay? So you can use NVM to install specific versions of Node, or you can simply say NVM install Node, and that will install the latest version of Node. And again, I already have the latest installed, which is version 11.13.0. And along with that, we're going to get NPM, the Node Package Manager, of which version is currently 6.7.0 on my machine. All right, so now that we have Node and NPM, we are going to use NPM to get the Firebase command line interface tools, or CLI. So you can kind of think of NPM kind of like CocoaPods, the dependency manager. We use it to install dependencies that we can use. Okay, so we are going to install the Firebase tools using NPM. So the way to do that is you say NPM install -g for global, and then Firebase -tools, and then say enter. All right, very good. Now we are going to need a code editor. I recommend VS Code. It's free and great, and this is what the Firebase team uses. So I would just recommend using this. All right, so that's what I'm going to be using, and it's free. You can just download it right here. All right, so the next step is we're getting ready to generate our code scaffolding, our starter project. So on our desktop, I'm going to right click and say new folder, and I'm going to name this folder, I'm going to name this folder Artable Cloud Functions. Okay. And then I'm going to go back into terminal, I'm going to cd to our desktop and our Artable Cloud Functions folder. Now we need to log into our Firebase project using the Firebase CLI by saying Firebase login. And it says here that I'm already logged in, so I'm going to log out first. Firebase log out. And then I'll say Firebase login again. There we go. So now it's going to ask you if you want to allow anonymous CLI usage. You can say yes or no. And then it's going to open up a browser. And you can select your account that has your Artable project. And then it's going to ask you for some permissions. Go ahead and say allow. And now we are successfully logged in. So I'm going to close this window, come back to terminal. And now we are ready to generate our starter project. So I'm going to say Firebase init. And it says here you're about to initialize a Firebase project in this directory. And it says which Firebase features do we want to set up. So you can scroll through these options using your up-down arrow keys. The one that you want to select, press space. We're obviously doing functions, so I'm going to press space. And then you press enter to confirm your choice. And then we select a Firebase project for this directory. Mine is called Artable, so I'm going to select that. You can select whatever you named yours, and then press enter. Then it asks what language you'd like to use to write cloud functions. You can pick JavaScript or TypeScript, depending on which one you are more comfortable with. Since the Stripe API docs are all in JavaScript, I'm just going to pick JavaScript. And then we can say, yes, we do want to use ESLint to catch bugs and enforce style. So I'm going to say yes. And then it asks us if we want to install dependencies with npm now, and that's a definite yes. That's going to install Firebase admin and functions tools for us. So I'm going to say yes. And that's going to go through and install those dependencies. Again, this is kind of like using CocoaPods to install some dependencies like Alamofire or the Firebase ones that we've been using. All right, so it says here that the Firebase initialization is complete. All right, so our starter project has been created. If we come over to our desktop and check out our Cloud Functions folder, we can see here we have a gitignore, a functions folder. Inside of this functions folder, we have index.js and node modules. Let's go ahead and open this all up in VS Code. I'm going to open up VS Code, or I guess it's just called Visual Studio Code. And depending on if you've used VS Code before, there might be some startup screens. I'm going to go to Open, go to the desktop, find our Artable Cloud Functions folder and say Open. Very good. All right, so here we have our functions directory. We have these things that you won't really need to worry about. This just has the default Artable ID. This is our Firestore project ID. But what we want to look at is here in the functions folder. So we have a few files here that are important. We have this package.json file, and this is a document that Node uses to describe our project. The important part here that we want to look at is the dependencies. These are the two dependencies that were installed when we were going through the wizard setup in terminal, Firebase admin and Firebase functions. These are the dependencies that we need to do all of our cloud function stuff. And when we get to when we install Stripe, then we'll see Stripe here in the dependencies as well, along with any other dependencies that you might need when you're writing your cloud functions. The next thing is this big folder of node modules, and this is all of the files for those dependencies. So for instance, in Xcode, this is comparable to our pods folder here, where we have this great big file where all of the actual code files for our pods are stored. Okay, so that's what that is similar to. All right, coming back to code. And then finally, we have our index.js file. And this is where we will be defining and writing all of our cloud functions. And we have a very simple HTTP trigger cloud function example called hello world. Let's go ahead and uncomment this. And this is how we write our cloud functions. We say exports dot the name of the function is equal to, and then functions, which is added right here, const functions require, and then the dependency here, functions dot, and then the trigger. So this one is an HTTPS trigger, which means that once we deploy it, we're going to get a URL that we can hit as a web request, and then whatever is inside of this function, that code will run on our cloud function. There's other kinds of triggers, so this could be functions dot firestore dot on create, or there's several others that we'll be looking at. Okay, so we have the type of trigger, and then we have our request and our response. So if this was a cloud function that required data, then you would send all of that data in the request, and then you could access that data right here. And then we finish up the cloud function by saying response.send, and this is just returning a string hello from Firebase. All right, so I'm going to save this. You always got to remember to save before deploying your Firebase cloud functions. It's something that I have frequently forgotten. And then we're going to go back into terminal, and we are going to deploy this simple cloud function to our project. And the way to do that is just by saying Firebase deploy and press enter. And because when we were going through the setup, we told it that these cloud functions were going to be connected to our Artable project, it's saying here that we are deploying to the Artable project. And it may take a minute or two to deploy the first time around. All right, so that was successfully deployed, and it says here, please note that it can take up to 30 seconds for your updated functions to propagate. So something to keep in mind, you can't deploy and then immediately test those functions. Otherwise, you'll probably be running the old function, all right? So we have here the function URL. We can copy this right here. And let's go back into our browser. And if we enter this, right here, we are going to see hello from Firebase. So that is actually the cloud function that is running and then returning this string, just like we told it to do right here in our cloud function code. So that is pretty cool when you think about it. We just entered a URL, which is the trigger for that cloud function. And then somewhere in the Google Cloud universe, an instance of our cloud function spun up, ran the code in it, and then returned this string to us. So I think that's pretty awesome. So let's go back into code, and let's change this up a little bit so you can see how it gets changed when we update it. I'm gonna say hello from Johnny B Codes. I'm gonna save that. And this time I'm gonna add something called a console log. So console.log, and then we can put in a message here. I'm going to say this is the console message. I'm going to save that, go back to terminal, and then we're going to redeploy this, Firebase deploy, and press enter. And while that's deploying, let's go back to our browser and come over to your Firebase project and come over here in the left panel to functions. And you can see here the function that we have deployed, hello world. And you can see a little bit of information, the function name, what type of trigger it is, the region, the runtime, memory, and timeouts. And if you click over here, you can see the logs for it. And that's what we're going to look at here, view logs. And if you have a bunch of functions, then you can filter them using this dropdown right here. We only have the one, so I'm going to say done. And you can see here our first execution of the cloud function hello world, which was run at 3:50, which was a couple of minutes ago. And it gives us the finished state 200. That means that everything went well. Tells us how long it took, about 90 milliseconds. And yeah, so very cool. So we have, let me check in terminal, and we have redeployed with our changes. So if we run this again, I'm going to say refresh. It says hello from Johnny B Codes now. So we've updated our Cloud Function string response. And now here in our artable functions, if I refresh this, we should see a few more logs. And here we go. And I think I have the times backwards here. So let's go ahead and get the most recent at the top. Here we go. And sure enough, we have these new console logs. It says function execution started. We have this thing about billing not being configured. We have our console log message here. So in code, in Visual Studio Code, we said console.log. This is the console message. And here in our functions panel under logs, we have the message right here. This is very useful to use for debugging, making sure that you're getting the data that you expect, etc. And once again, we finished with status code 200, and it took 105 milliseconds. All right, so there we have it. You've created your very first Cloud function and deployed it and learned how to call it via a web request. In the next lessons, we are going to dive into some more complex stuff using Stripe, and it's going to be really exciting, and I hope you're looking forward to it. I know that I am. I will see you there.